All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar series on open science for the discoverability of African research. My name is Ibuka Izike, and I'm the project manager at Africa PID. In case you don't know about Africa PID is a community-led digital archive for African research communication. And by enhancing the visibility of African research, we enable discoverability and collaboration opportunities for African scientists on the continent as well as globally. So today we welcome our speaker, Joy Owango from TCC Africa and the Africa PID Alliance. And she will be speaking on the topic, securing the future of African innovation, indigenous knowledge, and cultural heritage. But before we listen to what she has for us today, here is a little about her. Joy Owango is an award-winning founding director of the Training Center in Communication at TCC Africa, a registered trust in Kenya established in 2006. TCC Africa is the first African-based training center focused on teaching effective communication skills to scientists. Ms. Joy Owango is also the project lead at the Africa PID Alliance, an organization whose mission is to secure the future of African innovation, indigenous knowledge, and cultural heritage. Ms. Owango has a proven history of working in higher education across private, university, and non-governmental sectors. She was a successful higher education practitioner with Clarivate Analytics and has collaborated with the governments of Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Mauritius, Ghana, Senegal, Burkina Faso, among others. As the director of TCC Africa, she is currently working with 15 African countries that have committed to spending 1% of their GDP on higher education and research and development. Her achievements in enhancing higher education and research capacity in Africa were recognized by the Organization of Women in Science for the Developing World by UNESCO during the 2021 International Day for Women in Science. Once again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to the team at Africa PID and Ubuntu Alliance. And thank you to everyone in the audience. And now over to our speaker, Joy Owango.
Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me to today's webinar. And thanks for the kind introduction. So I'm going to take you through the Africa PID Alliance. Now, to begin with, and just to contextualize this, the Africa PID Alliance is the open infrastructure. It's the open infrastructural program of the Training Center in Communication. The Training Center in Communication has 4 active programs. One is on open science and advocacy, open infrastructure, data for impact, and higher education stakeholder engagement. So the Africa PID Alliance is the flagship program of our open infrastructure program. Now, what are we trying to do with the Africa PID Alliance? We want to leverage an open science to expose undisputed African data in the global knowledge economy, because there's quite a bit of misrepresentation of African data. And just to give you insight, we need to look at how Africa is represented in numbers. We represent about 18% of the world population. And we produce 1 to 2%, we contribute 1 to 2% of the global research and innovation. But this is being on the positive side, because in reality it's actually less than 1%, but this is going up. Now, when you're talking about misrepresentation of data, about 8% of African patent data is accessible in global databases. And this is not because we are not producing innovations, it's because the databases that harvest patent data on Africa rely on patents that are in the big IP5. And in order to register your patent in an IP5 registry, it will cost you about $5,000. That is about the budget of an average technical transfer office. So you'll find patents being filed nationally. And if they're filed nationally, you're not going to see them in international databases. Now, the reality is that the metadata standards are the same, whether you're going to publish nationally or internationally. So this discrepancy is quite obvious. And what we're trying to do with the Africa PID Alliance is beyond assigning persistent identifiers for indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage, but is also assigning identifiers for patent data. So this is what we are hoping to achieve. We want to secure the future of African indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage, supporting African scientists and inventors to realize their research and innovations. Now, the question is, why have we chosen these 3 areas? If you look at the entire research life cycle, these are the 3 areas that are vulnerable. But most importantly, these are the 3 areas where that extractive science or helicopter science has taken place because of the gray aspects on how to assign identifiers to protect these subject areas. So even when we are talking to universities, or knowledge managers within universities, they actually acknowledge the fact that the weakest point within their ecosystem is how to manage indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage and connecting that to the outputs that come out of it. Now, this is a continental program, and this program is supported by the African Academy of Sciences, the African Library Information Associations and Institutions, which is the umbrella body of all African libraries, the Association of African Universities, which is the umbrella body for all African universities, and our data centers, our primary data center is at the Kenya Education Network. And we are happy to say that the government of Kenya is coming in as a community engagement partner in 2 folds. The first part is as the Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife. That is where the State Department of Cultural Heritage and traditional knowledge is stored or is housed. And we're also getting positive responses from the National Research Fund, which is the funding body and the granting council of the government of Kenya. Now, the subsequent infrastructural partners who are interested in working with us are Zamren, which is an NREN based in Zambia. And we are already working with DOI managers, because at the end of the day, we're just not only producing a persistent identifier, we want a persistent identifier that solves persistence and accessibility. So with time, we are looking at creating DOIs. And right now, what we are looking at is, in order to produce a DOI that is fit for purpose, especially for the academic community, we are partnering with IRITI, which is a registration agency based in Taiwan, and whose job will be to manage the DOIs and the metadata. But at the same time, they're also going to train our stakeholders on how they can also do the same. Because you see, this is all about partnerships. Let's be honest, we have been regenerating DOIs, but we've not been actually producing DOIs. So this is a first of its kind in the geographic global south. What we are trying to do is the first of its kind in the geographic global south. So what we are trying to do is create an African open PID infrastructure and leveraging on existing technology. So what we are using is existing technology, which I'll take you through. And in order for that to be successful, we are going to ensure the creation, storage, governance, and management of African research content. We want to promote African content, and we want to connect African research content to citation analytical databases by showing the proper representation of the data that we actually produce. So you see, when you're looking at the low visibility of African research, there are quite a number of factors. And one of them is the visibility and the proper representation of our data. So PIDs will be able to help in achieving this, particularly what we're trying to do with the APA. Another thing that we noted was that there's a need for capacity strengthening for our knowledge managers. And we noticed one thing, as we were talking to them, there's a challenge when it comes to data management. They're still using the traditional methods of data management and not the multilinear levels of data management, which are accommodating open science. And because of that, now we are seeing the gray areas, how indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage and patent data is falling through the cracks. Okay, so every time we are having these conversations with librarians, the first thing they say is that it's not an issue of trying to understand PIDs, which already is another challenge for them, understanding the different types of PIDs, but it is effective data management so that they can support their academic community. Now, who are we working with this? We are working with AFLIA, and I'm happy to say we are going to produce the first Moodle on data management for librarians, which is going to be launched in Q4. And this is going to be rolling out every 6 months for librarians. And this is going to be a continental capacity strengthening program, which will be happening regularly in partnership with AFLIA and our stakeholder partners. Now, another thing we've also noted is that it's the limited funding opportunities that exist for knowledge management and scholarly infrastructural support. And what we want to do is actually we've created a fund whereby we are going to support capacity strengthening and providing funding for infrastructural development such that we are able to support communities that are able to provide support for their existing ecosystems on scholarly infrastructure and capacity strengthening on understanding the scholarly infrastructure ecosystem. Because again, as I said, these systems are far and wide, okay? And they are not regular. We are trying to make these activities as regular as possible because, as I mentioned, we speak to at least 3 or 4 universities per week, and the problems are the same. Understanding the knowledge management ecosystem, the data management ecosystem, understanding this ecosystem of PIDs. So it's not an issue of introducing a new PID, but it's also an issue of making them understand what exists and what works for them so that they can choose the right PID that works for them. So it's just not an issue of force-feeding them that these are PIDs that exist. It's what works for you and also based on your budget. And in our case, what makes ours unique is that it has targeted areas all the existing PIDs have missed out on. And I'll take you through how that supports the various schools within the university as well. So this is what you're trying to solve at the end of the day. You're preserving African indigenous knowledge, innovation, and cultural heritage under a dedicated, persistent infrastructure. Okay. Now, these are our international and also local continental partners. So those who are guiding us in making sure that what you're doing is effective are the Donor Foundation, the Corporation of National Research and Initiatives, the DOI Foundation, Crossref and DataSite, and most recently we have the Australian Research Data Commons who are producing RAID and local contexts. And local contexts are the ones who are striving to come up with ways to see how they can assign identifiers, different types of identifiers and traditional labels for indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage. Now, we've also created a working group, and within that working group, we have various partners, including DataSite, the Kenya Intellectual Property Institute, the government of Kenya, and local contexts, and we are inviting more people to join the working group as well. So let me take you through the product development. So as I said, we are working with existing infrastructure, okay? So we are using the Invenio for the research data management system. Invenio is what has been used to create Zenodo, which most of us are using. And it is what has been used to create the user interface. And the the PID we've created is called the Digital Object Container Identifier. It is a multilinear persistent identifier which can actually support the multilineal nature of indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage. And I'll take you through how that works. We have, and for the digital object management, we are using PODRA, which is also an open access solution. And then, of course, our data centers are at Kenneth. Now, as I said, the digital object container is multilinear in nature, meaning it can accommodate different types of persistent identifiers, whether they are handles. We are working on finalizing the ACK keys, but literally the entire DOI ecosystem has been successfully integrated within the digital object container. And that means when you release a digital object container, when you assign a digital object container, you can easily assign different persistent identifiers to different outputs relating to the original object. So you can have the entire life cycle of an object within the digital object container. Now, I'm happy to introduce to you the interface of the digital object container identifier. One of the things we have done is that, which makes us also unique as compared to the other partners, is that we have integrated the African Union languages. Remember, this is a Global South problem, and we found a Global South solution to solve this issue of assigning persistent identifiers, but most importantly, also looking at how we can contextualize it within the continent settings. Okay, so these are all the African Union languages, but what does this mean? It also means that we are capable, and we've actually started in this ongoing phase, integrating national languages, not are considered as indigenous languages, but are national languages, to the docket. In this case, we are looking at Korean, Hindi, Mandarin, Amharic. They can be integrated within this ecosystem because research is being done in those languages and publications are being written in those languages as well. So, so what do you expect in the digital object container? So how does it support also the cultural heritage and indigenous knowledge ecosystem? Remember, I said it's multilinear in nature. The PIDs that exist right now are linear in nature, all right? So, number one, the trunk. We like using the ecosystem of a tree. So look at the trunk. The trunk is where you can have, you assign the digital object container to indigenous knowledge, cultural heritage, or patent data. Out of that trunk, where you have the indigenous knowledge, there are various outputs that will come out. So you'll have publications. So if your institute has already subscribed to DataCite, Crossref, or any of the DOI ecosystems, you can link to that, all right? If you have secondary publications or any other documents, visuals, audio, video, you can assign either handles or the ACK keys. Now, beyond this, we've gone 2 steps ahead. Number one, we are working with the grants offices or the research offices, such that any proposal that was produced against this project can also be assigned a RAID ID. The organizations that were involved and the researchers that were involved will also be assigned their respective IDs. Remember, all this is connected to the original object that contributed to the research output. So this means if you're looking at a university ecosystem, so let's look at this from a university ecosystem. You have the specialist libraries and you have the central libraries. In the specialist library, you might have your herbarium, where you get your indigenous knowledge, or where the indigenous knowledge is stored, whether it is within the library or the National Museum. So out of that, we will assign a PID to the object that the research is being worked on indigenous knowledge. And every single output that comes out of that indigenous knowledge output will be connected to that original object. If there was a proposal that was funded, a RAID ID will be assigned to it, okay? And it still originally connects to the object, whether the organizations involved or whether there were individuals involved. And all this gives you all this is contained within the digital object container identifier, okay? And it gives you a multi-linear PID support system that will, at the end of the day, support the life cycle of the digital object. In this case, the digital object being the original information where you got this from. And this is where we noticed, when we were talking to the libraries, when we asked them, share with us your indigenous knowledge and your cultural heritage, they were quick to share with us the publications. But when we asked them, can we get the information what contributed to this publication? So where did you get it? From the herbarium or from the cultural heritage organization? Where did you get this information from? Okay, they found it difficult to connect that original information to the publication and even the subsequent outputs. So all of a sudden is when they are seeing there is a mismatch between the specialist libraries and the central libraries. That is why it is so easy to see the publications, but not the original information. And that is where the gray area lies and the harvesting takes place. Now, the reason why what makes this unique is because with the digital object container or the docket, you can assign a docket not only to the object, but also when the license is being given to a researcher. When you're going to do your research, you have to get a license to conduct research. And if it is going to involve indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage, you get a license for that. We will add the docket to that. That is the persistent identifier. It protects the sovereignty. So it is a layer on top of just a serial number. Okay. And then that docket, you will see all the outputs that came out of it. And this is how it looks like within the interface. So you generate your docket. And if there are publications, you can have a variety of publications, preprints, whatever publications that your conference proceedings. So you assign whichever, based on what your institute has subscribed to. And then if you have various documents, as I'd said earlier on, visuals, audios, you name it, whatever outputs that come out of it that are not publications, we will assign various handles, DOIs, respective DOIs to it, or you can have a handle or an ACKI. As I said, the ACKI, we are just finalizing on that with the developers. And then you can also include this, it also includes who did the work and the organizations involved, the funders. I hope now you're seeing the connection with the funders. Okay, in this case, it used to be Crossref, but now Crossref with the funders ID has been connected into ROR. So it is ROR and data site with the grantor's ID. So all this is connected, and then you have the projects. Now, look at this from the university ecosystem. All right? Look at this from the university ecosystem. When you're looking at projects, that is the DVC's office research or the grants office. So the librarian will be able to pull out that information. When you're looking at creators and organizations, they'll either get it directly from the researchers or the DVC research. When you're looking at publications and documents on the outputs that came out on indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage, two schools will be represented: the schools of health, the schools of social sciences, and the School of Arts and Humanities. This is where you'll get the publications from those researchers being brought into the library. And then when you're looking at the docket, when you're generating the docket, it will be the specialist library where this information was originally got. Remember, there are universities that already have these specialist libraries, like the University of Botswana. They have their herbarium, which is about 1,000 kilometers from Gaborone. We have Muhimbili University of Allied Sciences in Tanzania, who have their herbarium within the university. But then you see now we are connecting that herbarium, which is a specialist library, to the primary, to the central library. And at the same time, connecting them to the DVC research or the grants office. We are actually helping the life cycle within the university ecosystem to be a bit smooth. Not the life cycle, the workflow within the university to be a bit smooth, focusing on those schools that have been largely ignored, on the social sciences and the arts and humanities. What are we seeing? There's a need. We need to have accessible scholarly data infrastructure. We are dreaming big, even though we are facing affordability issues. But this is why we want to produce this in Africa. We are going to make the cost as low as possible. And what we are proposing is a hybrid digital object identification, linking local handles and DOIs. And as I said, it is possible. We've actually seen that it is possible. In our last meeting with the University of Botswana yesterday, they are sharing with us data, and they actually brought all the leaders within the academic community so that they could share the data based on the indigenous knowledge that has been produced. And they all agreed that there was a mismatch on the output from that finally was put in the central library vis-a-vis what came out of the specialist libraries. And you may ask, is this actually happening? Yes. If you're in life sciences, if you're in biological sciences, if you're in health sciences, the connection of the dots already exists. So if you're looking for a sample, an original sample that led to research output in, if you're in life sciences or biomedical sciences, all you can do is get just a PubMed ID. You see, they're already doing it. It's just that in certain subject areas, it just fell through the cracks. Now, what we want to do is centralize articles, data sets, resources under a single container ID. It makes it easier for researchers and practitioners to access related information in one place. So contextualize that in the 3 areas I've looked at: patents, indigenous knowledge, and cultural heritage. We are looking at researchers having a better way to navigate through various components seamlessly and enhancing their overall user experience. But it's not only researchers, but it's also for knowledge managers. When they're doing their bibliometric analysis, this will give them even richer information on those areas. We are looking at a holistic understanding where the container ID allows the aggregation of diverse content types, providing a more comprehensive view of a specific topic, a research project in, let's say, for example, in biomedicine or ethnobotany or ethnopharmacology. All right. We are looking at improved citations attributions, efficient metadata management, which I've just explained right now. You'll end up having much more rich metadata management under one ID. And we're also looking at enhanced integrated data sets within a digital container. I've talked about that. Now, what is happening in Africa right now? We have no strategy on persistent identifiers. There's no national strategy. There's no continental strategy, but there is a roadmap. But the roadmap highlights the different types of PIDs we need to use. But what we need right now is a strategy that Africans can use that can aid in their research sovereignty. It's just not an issue of providing free PIDs or low-hanging fruit PIDs that don't solve persistence and accessibility. We need to be realistic, because if we want proper representation of our data, we need to have PIDs that solve persistence and accessibility. And this is what we are able to do. And also with the Africa PID Alliance, what we are doing is we are in the process of becoming members of the DOI Foundation as well. Because with that, it means that we are joining a larger ecosystem. We are influencing the ecosystem such that we assign PIDs to areas that have been ignored. We assign PIDs and create PIDs from a global South lens, okay? That will make it easy for researchers in the global South have better representation. As I'd mentioned earlier, our observations include poor or lack of data management in universities. There's lack of digitization of outputs, but this is already changing. And as I'd mentioned, the digital object container supports the various departments within the university, which are the School of Social Sciences or the Department of Social Sciences, Arts and Humanities. If you're in the Global North, Institutes of Cultural Heritage. So if you're a university in the Global North, it will be an Institute of African Studies or Asian Studies, the Deputy Vice Chancellor's Office, the Grant Office, the specialist libraries, in this case, herbariums, or the technical transfer office because of the patents as well, and also the central library. All this supports, this is what DOCID is able to do. These are the partners who would benefit from the digital object container identifier. And where we are right now, we are in phase 1. We are looking at a 10-year phase. When each phase with 3 years, and we're already in phase 1. And I'm happy to say the project is set up we are in the phase 2 of the prototype development. We're actually launching it next week in Prague in the PID Fest, and we are creating strategic market partnerships. And we've been fortunate to get quite a number of use cases from universities, indigenous knowledge and practitioners and cultural heritage curators, and also national patent registration agencies. As I said, we are leveraging on existing technology, but what we are doing as well heavily goes in line with Agenda 2063. So this is not something we're doing in isolation, okay? And it also goes in line with the SDGs, particularly SDG 4, 9, 10, 16, and 17. And out of all this, the one which speaks volumes to me in Agenda 2063 is that we're using world-class infrastructure to crisscross across the continent. So as I said, we're building on existing technology, open access technology, to create an identifier that can be not only used in Africa, but replicated in other parts of the global south because of its multilineal nature. Now, these are the activities that we've been involved in so far. These are the partnerships that we've created and the webinars we've been hosting. We are already a signatory of the Barcelona Declaration on Open Research Information because we believe in using open infrastructure to make research accessible. But when you're talking about accessibility, it needs to also solve persistence, but at the same time, create research sovereignty. Our upcoming webinar is, and this one we are very happy about this, is with two governments, the government of Kenya and the government of Burkina Faso, where we are talking about how effective fair data management aids in the visibility of African funding output. So one of the activities we were doing as a center and also as a program was working with granting councils and making sure that they were assigned PIDs. You see, we are talking about misrepresentation of data. We have all these ecosystems around us, and I can assure you, of all the 16 granting councils, only one had a PID and were accessible, and that was the National Research Foundation in South Africa. Now, when we started in February, we have now successfully indexed 10, and 10 of them have PIDs, and we are now working on the remaining 6 to make sure that they have PIDs, but also making sure that their affiliate partners are also assigned with PIDs. The ripple effect will be felt even not only for our digital object container when we are assigning it to stakeholders, but also for them as granting councils. We are going to see their output, and we are going to see a difference in contribution of funding. In this case, I mean, when you look at funding output coming out of Africa, we normally see who gives us the funding, but we rarely see what Africa is contributing in terms of funding. So what we are doing is also giving a change in narrative on highlighting the proper representation of African data, which will actually be relevant to us when we are doing, when we are assigning the digital object containers to our stakeholders. And the other stakeholders we are working with on this is the African Open Science Platform and the Association of African Universities. So in a nutshell, what makes our project unique is, number one, it is global South-centric. The persistent identifiers that have been created have been global North-centric, and they have helped. Let's not deny that. They have helped. But let's not ignore the geopolitical biases and economic biases that exist and have made the global South, particularly Africa, for lack of better words, suffer. And when we're talking about suffer, it is misrepresentation of our output. That is number one. Number two, helicopter science. Number three, as I said, number one was misrepresentation of data. Number two was on helicopter science. Number three, due to poor data management systems, you're not able to see the work even within the ecosystem. So we've had poor workflows within our universities. I know we are trying to change, but what we are trying to do is that with what we are producing, with what you're producing, first of all, data is going to be stored in Africa first. That is what we are looking at. Data is stored in Africa first, then the secondary partners can store the data in the various clouds. But data is stored in Africa. The PIDs are produced in Africa, and you're looking at a situation whereby we are contributing not only as consumers when it comes to this technology on digital object identification, but also as producers as well, making it the first of its kind, not only in the continent, but in the geographic global south. Thank you for listening to me, and I can't wait to hear what your questions are in regards to our project.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joy. It's been a wonderful session so far. We've heard a lot about what Africa PID Alliance is doing to help, promote research in this part of the world. All right, so right now we'll be moving straight to the Q&A session. So those in the audience, if you have any questions, you can just type it in the Q&A section of this, Zoom room, or unmute and ask directly.
Yeah. So I've seen one question on the technical documentation. We are going to release the we're actually going to publish the technical documentation of the Africa PID of the digital object container on Zenodo after we launch it at the PID Fest. So we are cleaning up that documentation, so you're going to see it, and it's going to be published on Zenodo. So yeah, just give it a couple of weeks. You should be able to see it.
All right. Thank you very much for that wonderful answer. And thank you for asking that question. So do we have more questions? You can just type in the chat or unmute and ask directly. So this is the session for questions. Okay. I can't see any questions so far. In the absence of, okay, I have somebody raising his hand. Azizo the Fonseca, please permit me or forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrongly. All right, you can unmute and ask your question, Azizo. Azizo, can you hear me? I see you're putting up your hand. Can you hear me? You can unmute or ask.
I think we need to permit him to speak. Let me just try to do that.
All right. Thank you.
I've seen a question on the cost. Now, yes, what we are trying to do is that we want to make this as affordable as possible, but we are creating a membership program. We've already created a membership program whereby once a university becomes a member, they have back files. They have access to these DOIs. But then what we are doing is, and this is something I would encourage you to take advantage of. If you're willing to give us seed data, you'll have access to the docades at least for free for your back files. And that is what we are doing. So this is why we are receiving such positive responses from the university. So far, we've got some really positive responses from Rhodes University, Stellenbosch, Muhimbili University of Allied Sciences, the Botswana International University of Science and Technology. I just mentioned University of Botswana. Of course, our parent partner, the University of Nairobi. We have quite a few from Jomo Kenyatta. And also we are getting a few responses from Western Africa, like the University of Ghana. And this is after they even noticed that they didn't even have a data management policy. They're willing to start from scratch with us. And also the University of Cape Coast. So if you're willing to share with us your seed data, first of all, we will guide you on how we need that data. We'll guide you on how we need that seed data. Then one of the perks of becoming one of our earlier adopters and partners is that you'll have the docket free of charge.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. While Harold sorts out the issue with Azizo.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Can you speak now?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
All right. We can hear you. Go ahead and ask your question, Aziz.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. My name is Aziz da Fonseca. I'm part of the library here at Wits University. I'm the head of digitization. Now, I wanted you just to elaborate on how did you go about implementing the infrastructure to store this data? Because you are talking about a really massive amount of data once you start having an influx of collaborators and partners. So how have you gone about ensuring the feasibility of this data storage?
Okay, so we've this is what I was saying. We are in the final conversations because we're still getting the metadata for the use cases. We're in the final conversations with IRITI. They will be supporting that entire ecosystem, because what we noticed is that it is one thing to come up with the PID, which we in turn hope to turn it into a DOI. It's another thing to store it, clean that data, clean the metadata, and manage the DOIs. So we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So one of our partners, IRITI, which is a DOI registration agency based out of Taiwan, is the partner we are going to work with to handle all that. Now, why did we choose IRITI over the other registration agencies? Because there are about 10 registration agencies. We could have easily used Crossref or DataSite. The reason why we chose IRITI, first of all, it's in the Global South. So we are looking at people who have a Global South lens. Number two, it's the way they started from scratch, just like the way we are started. They started from scratch, coming up with the DOI. Theirs was unique to Taiwan, but also coming up with the entire ecosystem of managing DOIs and metadata. So, and of course, IRITI is already interconnected with all the DOI agencies. That is the power of being part of the DOI Foundation. They're all interconnected. It's just that the only difference is that we targeted a partner who was based in the Global South. And they are working closely with Korea DOI and China DOI and JALC, Japan DOI. Now, let me talk about why Korea DOI. It's the only agency that registration agency that has successfully started assigning PIDs for patent data, but they're focusing on Korea. For us now, we are focusing on Africa, and we are going to spread it beyond Africa, and also indigenous knowledge. So you can see, even though from an economic perspective, Korea is a high-income country, it is still geographically in the Global South. So it happened to be just the Global South that came up with these solutions. So in terms of the storage, we felt it would make sense to work with a partner that is based in the Global South amongst the DOI agencies. So we won't be handling that. We won't be handling that, but it will be IRITI handling that, and they've got a proven track record of storage management, metadata management, and DOI management as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does in part, because I suppose your agenda is to ensure that research outputs that have been done from African data remain here and benefit researchers that are in the continent and can reach, if I may, for a better word, the regional source of the data rather than the digested data. So again, my question is that if that is the case, then one needs to ensure that we really remain accountable for that data and manage that data in a conducive way that does not limit us in any way in terms of accessibility. So
I lost you there. I just need to put on my earphones. Say that again.
Now, I'm saying that I'm getting to a point where I agree entirely with the premise of having us storing the data and managing that data. I just want to get a sense of how sustainable the partnerships that have been created will be in ensuring that there's no hindrance in giving accessibility to the regional data. That's one point.
Good. Now,
Second,
one of the
yeah. Then the other point that I wanted to clarify, or at least allude to, is how successful is your foundation been in ensuring that the funders have created these identifiers that will then link to the original sources of the data. Because most cases, you tend to have funders that have funded projects. The data is all over the place. You have no sense of the originality. You have no sense of the central repository for the data, or the research outputs that emanate from that funding. Yeah.
Now,
thank you.
So now you've answered. First of all, you've highlighted the second part. You've highlighted a problem we noted. This is why one of the things we did actively starting in February this year, actually it was a conversation we started 3 years ago with the granting councils, was to make sure that they were assigned PIDs. That is the first basic bit, okay? So that was the most basic bit. Now, within the institutions, and then I'll talk about the data storage. Within the institutions, what we are trying to do is, what we intend to do is that we want to work with the grants officers, to make sure that every single project that they have, at least on the indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage, because that's what we are targeting, though it can be spread to other research areas, but let's look at what we are focusing on right now, that every single project on indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage, and every single project that is funded is assigned a PID, okay? It's assigned a PID. And then the researcher, by the time the researcher is going to the herbarium, or where they're getting the original source, whether it is on cultural heritage or indigenous knowledge, that is already digitized. Let's be very pragmatic. That is already digitized, okay? Is already assigned a PID. That is why we are going in various ways. We are speaking to the specialist libraries within the universities to make sure that their dockets assigned to their indigenous knowledge and cultural heritage, and whether it is within the university or the national herbarium. So those are the traditional knowledge and cultural heritage curators, because by the time the researcher goes and gets that information, he will have to cite that docket that has been assigned to the indigenous knowledge. So we are trying to do this in a multifaceted way, because we notice the same problems that you're actually highlighting. Because in the beginning, when we started the project, we thought it was an issue of assigning the DOIs, or rather the PIDs, to the indigenous knowledge. But the more we spoke to the librarians, the more we realized that there was a fragmentation in the workflow. So it was easy to get just the publications, but it wasn't easy to connect all the dots. So now, even the kind of meetings we are having, because it cannot be done at the funders level, it starts at the institutional level, such that when we have these streamlined systems within the universities, it becomes easier for them now to get that information easily accessible. Now, from the funder's perspective, the same funder you're talking about are the ones asking for data management plans. And when you go to institutions, very few institutions in Africa have even data policies, let alone understand how to create data management plans. So again, how we are coming in is just feeding into your question, is now building their capacity such that they also know not only how to create data management plans, but data management policies, such that they are able to connect the multifaceted ecosystem that you are seeing right now in data management pertaining to open science. So such that you are able to connect, you're able to have identifiers assigned to objects in specialist libraries. And when I talk about specialist libraries, I'm connecting just in this case to the herbarium as an example, specialist libraries. And that information that is assigned a DOI can be used when you're conducting your research. And when the publications are produced, you can connect all the dots. That is just, first of all, on the library perspective. But then at the same time, since we're also talking to the directorates of research or the grants offices, making sure that they have PIDs assigned to their projects. So the person who will be this in Grant Central Station is the knowledge manager. So when she receives an output on indigenous knowledge, she'll quickly ask the researcher, where is the funded proposal? Okay. Or within their data management plans, when you're sending us publications outputs on indigenous knowledge, please include the ID for the grant proposal. Okay. Include the ID for the original object. So you're able to connect the dots. Now, with this process happening at an institutional level, now we can start influencing funders, because funders are asking for data management plans. And please note, institutions do not even have data management policies. We know this because we are working with the Association of African Universities, and we have an ongoing survey to understand whether universities have data management policies or they even understand whether they have data management plans. So we have to start from the bottom and then use that influence to influence funders. And this is why we are working with the Association of African Universities. It's a bit messy, I understand, but this mess is as a result of what we actually found ourselves in, because we thought it was a simple, we did not expect the problem to reach the level of poor data management or lack of data management. We thought in the beginning, we were seeing it as a PID issue whereby you need to protect the sovereignty of this indigenous knowledge. But as we are connecting the dots, it's a bigger problem. And that is why now our approach is multifaceted to target the various offices. And that in turn answers your question. And that influence and our parent partner, the Association of African Universities, will aid us in influencing the conversations with the funders. And in terms of data storage, the sustainability of data storage, we are working with NRENs. Okay? As it is right now, NRENs are their role is storing data from our existing ecosystems, higher education ecosystems. All right? So for us, and these NRENs, fortunately for us, these NRENs are government mandated. And we've targeted countries where there are data acts. Kenya has a data act. Zambia has a data act. So first of all, it means we are looking at the protection and the sovereignty of the data that is stored there. So that is why we chose NRENs as the first gate, as the first stop for the storage of the data. And the sustainability aspect of it is, these are our partners who are looking at this. This is just not a project. This is going to be an institutionalized process. It's just not a project to produce PIDs and we are gone. No, this is an institutionalized process. This is why we have these continental partners involved in this activity. Because at the end of the day, we are looking at a sustainable ecosystem that can not only store our data, and this is why I'm saying we are using NRENs, but also protect our data. So countries that have existing data acts. And interestingly enough, as we've been having conversations with the various universities, some of them have been recommending we use their respective national NRENs. Like Botswana, they said they wouldn't mind if the data from Botswana is stored at Botswana. So you see, it's still the same ecosystem. It's an NREN that will be storing that data. So that will be the primary source of where the data is stored. And then the secondary bit will be with our global partners. I hope that answers your question, Azizo.
Thank you very much, Joy. That is great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, I do acknowledge it is messy. We were slightly naive. We were slightly naive because at first it was protecting our heritage, our our sovereignty, but then we realized it's a bigger problem. And we are seeing how, and we've actually developed the docket based on talking to librarians, because they want something that is easy to use. They want something that can connect the schools that have been largely ignored, where there's a lot of gray area. So that is the schools of social sciences and the schools of arts and humanities. And also, we also need to acknowledge what what universities are doing. They're already digitizing arts and humanities and cultural heritage, because they're seeing its strong contribution to the global economy, or the knowledge economy as well. I'm seeing more comments.
Yes, there are some comments in comment section. Maybe I'll just take that and you just speak on it briefly. Melba Sitwala said, I love the aspect of strengthening capacity. Data management remains a challenge, and as organizations and projects end up losing critical knowledge or reinvent the wheel, or this knowledge or information is not accessible. Melba, if you can unmute and give us more insight as to what you're saying, that would be appreciated. And this other person, he has his name as Anonymous Attendee, says, based on Azizo's comment, I think there's a misunderstanding about what is being stored here. The PIDs do not take up much space, surely.
No, they don't.
It's more about compute power. I think Azizo is misunderstanding by
from the scans,
thinking that you are planning to store the digital files. That is scans. So if you can just speak more on that.
Yeah. So we're not storing digital. We're not storing digital files. These are already being stored within the respective institutions. We are assigning persistent identifiers to the digitized information. So they don't take much storage. And thanks for the anonymous attendee. Thanks for that contribution.
So thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
So finally, I'll just ask this as we are about to get to the top of the hour. So thank you for all that you've shared with us today, and it's indeed a delight to know all of what the Africa PID Alliance is doing to help promote research in this part of the world. So my question is, what role do you see for African governments and policymakers in supporting the initiatives of the Africa PID Alliance to safeguard and promote African innovation and cultural heritage?
Okay, so let's look at beyond cultural heritage. It is protecting the sovereignty of research. Cultural heritage and indigenous knowledge is just one of it. It is protecting the sovereignty of our research. So what are African governments doing? Number one, the fact that African governments are setting up data acts to protect our data. That is to protect our sovereignty of what we produce. Okay. Number two, what we are seeing is that there's been a renaissance in the continent. The rise of African granting councils, the adoption of open science principles, okay? Like in East Africa, when all the 7 presidents signed off the STI policy with open science principles to make sure research is accessible and visible. And the same is happening now in Western Africa. But what this means is that you're seeing more governments contributing actively to higher education and ST&I and open science. This is now where we come in, because first of all, they're looking at what we need to do to increase the visibility of African research output. All right. And how do we protect our sovereignty? And what they're contributing is, first of all, putting policy in place. We are seeing them actively getting involved in that. We are seeing governments, we've been approached by some of the governments to support the project, whether it is community engagement or whether it is financial engagement. Why? Because through the rise of open science, they are looking at centralized systems of storing data. If you have centralized systems of storing data, the next thing is protecting that data, making that data accessible. all right? And this all feeds into the fair ecosystem. And then you need to look at the next step beyond the fair ecosystem is preserving the sovereignty of African research. So governments are already actively getting involved in their own way, and we are feeding into that system. We are feeding into that system because we are in the, when you critically look at it, in the revolution, we are in the AI stage, okay? And we've missed about 3 revolutions, okay? Technological revolutions. And African governments are keen to work on anything that is going to aid in protecting the sovereignty of African research, increase the visibility of African research, but most importantly, give the proper representation of African research to the global north. Because right now, we are no longer going to be consumers of this technology, but we're also going to be producers of the technology as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful answer. And then for those asking for the links are in the chat. They've been shared by one of my colleagues. And you can find the links to the Africa PID Alliance, the link to their website, and the link to Africa Archive's website, which is africaarchive.org, and so many other links in the chat. So we've gotten to the top of the hour. This is a minute past 12 p.m. here in Nigeria. And we'll be rounding up because I discovered we don't have any other questions. So I want to say a big thank you to each and every one of you, and a big thank you to our guests, Ms. Joy Owango, for making herself available for this wonderful webinar session. So thank you for joining us all. The recording of the session and the slides will be made available on our website at africaarchive.org and our parents' website, africaarchive.ubuntunet.net. All of these links you will find in the chat. You can also get the full details and register for this ongoing webinar series at africaarchive.org/webinars. This webinar series is co-organized by UbuntuNet Alliance and Access to Perspectives as part of the ORCID Global Participation Program. Our speaker today has been Ms. Joy Owango from TCC Africa and the Africa PID Alliance. And we've been talking on securing the future of African innovation, indigenous knowledge, and cultural heritage. So we have many more exciting webinar sessions and speakers in our subsequent sessions. And our next webinar session will be on the 20th of June, 2024. And it's going to be at 8 a.m. Watts, 9 a.m. Central African Time, and 10 a.m. East African Time with Catherine Napier and Lucy Montgomery, both of the Cotton Open Knowledge Initiative, COKI. So they are going to be our guests in our next webinar session. So a big thank you to each and every one of you for coming to this webinar session. And once again, thank you to our amazing guests, Ms. Joy Owango, and to our team at Africa Archive and UbuntuNet Alliance. I say a big thank you to each and every one of you, and see you in our next webinar session. Bye.